Hello, and welcome back to Random Vids. So for today's, or this week's YouTube video, I decided let's go back to some SpongeBob, and let's review every episode from SpongeBob Season 2. Season 2, in my opinion, is probably my favorite out of the classic era of SpongeBob, where, I don't know, I just feel like Season 2, I don't know, there's just something about Season 2 that's just wow, it has a lot of really good episodes. Season 3 I find a little overrated, and Season 1 is just fine. But Season 2 just has so many great episodes. Some of them, yeah, are overrated, but I don't think they're that bad. So let's get into these episodes, and I hope you enjoy this video. Also, remember, this week I'm going down to the beach. So tomorrow I'm planning on doing a live stream on my second channel. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel, to my second channel, the link, if I remember it, will be down in the description. I probably won't remember it, but it's in last week's video, my other channel, if you don't know where it is. But I'm planning on doing a live stream while I'm down there. So anywho, without further ado, let's get into reviewing the SpongeBob episodes. Here we go. A nice start into Season 2 with Your Shoes Untied. So SpongeBob tries to teach Patrick how to tie his shoes, but SpongeBob forgets how to tie his shoes since they were tied for so long he forgets. So we spend the whole episode seeing SpongeBob trip over his laces and try to ask people how to tie shoes, but no one else knows how to either. Until eventually Gary ties SpongeBob's shoes for him, which is kind of goofy. And then the episode ends with a catchy loop, or catchy song. Forget what it's called. I forget what it's called, but it's a good song, actually. And this is such a great, starting episode to a great season. I'd give it probably a B+. Now down to another great episode from Season 2. This one is just so hilarious. I like how Squidward is in charge, and he has to go, quote-unquote, run some errands, so he leaves SpongeBob in charge of the Krusty Krab. Unfortunately, Squidward can't relax now because he keeps thinking SpongeBob is going to do something to the Krusty Krab or blow it up or whatever, which makes for a lot of funny moments leading up to that. And this is how you do a Squidward episode, not the stupid torture stuff we get in later seasons. No, this is great. I love this episode. This is easily one of my favorites from Season 2. It's an easy A tier for me. Moving right on to another classic, amazing episode from Season 2. So, SpongeBob eats a sundae. And it's not a normal ice cream sundae. No, it's a sundae that he created himself. And unfortunately, this sundae leads him to have stinky breath, and no one wants to be near him except for Patrick without a nose. So we do get a lot of funny moments, like Patrick saying, maybe it's the way you're dressed, or maybe you're just ugly, and then SpongeBob's like, you gotta be kidding me. And then, of course, Patrick ends up telling SpongeBob a story to make him feel better, which is hilarious. There's a lot of funny moments of this episode. I also like how Patrick is trying to help SpongeBob in this episode, instead of mid-season Patrick where he's just annoying, but we'll get to those seasons later. Oh boy, this is going to be fun. But overall, this is just such a great episode with great, I don't know, it's just a great episode. I'd give it an A. Now it's time for Bossy Boots. Man, such another great episode from Season 2. This one I actually find a little underrated, not gonna lie. It's a great one. I like how Pearl is taking over the Krusty Krab and she's decorating it the way she wants it, which makes for a really great Pearl episode, which sometimes she can have really great episodes, and other times it's just kind of eh. But no, this one is really great. And it's nice seeing her and SpongeBob getting along. And even when it's time to fire Pearl, Pearl doesn't get upset about it because she actually wants to quit. So then they play a prank on Mr. Krabs. Not play a prank, but they say SpongeBob fires Pearl in front of Mr. Krabs. I don't know. It's just a funny episode between the costumes that they have to wear to the way that the Krusty Krab is set up to the jokes. It's a great one. This is another... I don't know if it's quite A tier. I really do want to give it A tier though, but I think I'll probably give it at least a B plus. It's a great episode. Next one on our list is Big Pink Loser. I miss it when Patrick used to be likable and have great episodes. Nowadays, the episodes that star Patrick are usually a little more especially since now that the Patrick Show is out, so they try to reference too many things from the Patrick Show. They bring too many things from the Patrick Show over to SpongeBob. Also, the fact that he's one of those characters that just went so far downhill during mid SpongeBob, it's hard to bring him back to like a good character like he is back here. But anywho, Big Pink Loser, oh man, this episode is hilarious as heck. So Patrick wants to win an award because SpongeBob is winning a bunch of awards. So Patrick tries to work at the Krusty Krab to win an award. But Patrick fails miserably, with a lot of hilarious scenes like Patrick continuously eating the Krabby Patty to the iconic phone scene where the customer calls and like, is this the Krusty Krab? And Patrick's like, no, this is Patrick. And then he gets mad and slams the phone down. Oh my. And then the Patrick, I'll show you how to open a jar, and Patrick is, I don't know, I just don't have words for this one. It's a hilarious episode. I don't know. I don't have words for this one. It's just such a great episode with so many memes in this one. Also, like in the second half, how Patrick is just trying to copy SpongeBob, and at least towards the end, he ends up getting an award after all. So this was back in the day when we still had like good endings to episodes, especially Patrick episodes. But man, this one is a great season 2 episode. In fact, I think this deserves our first S tier. It's just such a great episode. I love it. Next on our list is Bubble Buddy. Okay, not gonna lie. This episode could have been a little better. I don't think it's necessarily a terrible episode, especially since this is still like classic SpongeBob writing, so there's a lot of funny moments in this episode. Or I should say, they still do a good job writing. This isn't before they started going downhill or anything. But you do get a few stinkers here and there, and not saying this episode is horrible, but I don't know, comparison to a lot of the other episodes in Season 2, it's just not my favorite. So SpongeBob is lonely, so he makes a bubble character, and he calls him Bubble Buddy. Very interesting introduction to Bubble Buddy. Bubble Buddy doesn't really do much, and he ends up causing a lot of trouble, actually. Whether if that's at the Krusty Krab or at the beach, etc. Which, that tended to get old, honestly, not gonna lie. It's just SpongeBob and Bubble Buddy causing trouble, and then everyone mad at them and wanted to pop Bubble Buddy. I mean, there's a few funny things in this episode, but nothing, like, amazing or anything. So, honestly, this episode is only a D tier for me. It's just kind of boring, in my opinion. And the whole plot is annoying, too, with everyone getting annoyed at Bubble Buddy. So, at least they gotten better with the Bubble Buddy episodes, but back in the day, not quite so much. Dying for Pie. Alright, this is better. Now we're back. And the great episodes. And man, this episode is just hilarious from start to finish. It's Employee Appreciation Day at work, I believe. So Squidward and SpongeBob have to get each other a gift. And SpongeBob ends up making Squidward a sweater or a shirt full of his eyelashes, and even a shirt made of his own tears. Squidward doesn't have a gift for SpongeBob, so he ends up buying a pie from Pie Ritz, and not knowing that it is an explosive pie. So he buys it for SpongeBob, but he ends up thinking that SpongeBob ate this pie when he found out it explodes. So Squidward tries to make SpongeBob's last hours on Earth meaningful and like happy, and he ends up hanging out with SpongeBob, which is really cool. And it doesn't seem like Squidward hates this too. Like some episodes, you can tell Squidward really doesn't want to hang out with SpongeBob and wants to do wants nothing to do with him. But what I really like about this episode is that even though SpongeBob is kind of pulling Squidward around town and doing things he wants to do. The difference is that Squidward wants to do this stuff. He's not forced into doing it. He wants to do it. And it makes it really hilarious too. And I love all the games that they play too. It's hilarious. And then the ending where they're watching the sunset with the brick wall. And we're meant to think that SpongeBob blew up then, but it's just SpongeBob blowing bubbles. He didn't end up being the pie. He just ended up hiding it in his pocket. But then it ends up going on Squidward's face and it explodes. Ouch. Overall, this is an amazing episode. I love it. I think I'd probably give this one an S tier as well. It's just that good. So now this is the first out of 2 episodes where Mr. Krabs is a robot. Except this one is a little worse than Crabborg from Season 3 in my opinion. So Imitation Krabs has Plankton dressing up as, or building a Mr. Krabs robot. And, the meanwhile, SpongeBob is stupid and thinks this robot is actually Mr. Krabs. So then we see a bunch of scenes with, Plankton trying to get Mr. Krabs out of the Krusty Krab so he can trick SpongeBob. And when he finally gets Mr. Krabs out of the Krusty Krab, he tries to get the secret formula, but SpongeBob has to do all these different things before they're allowed to read the formula, which I think is so hilarious. Definitely my favorite part about the episode is that they can't just, take it out and read it. No, they have to do a whole bunch of tricks and stuff before they can read the formula. It's a hilarious... that part is easily my favorite part about this episode. The rest of the episode is just okay, honestly. It's not the best thing ever, but hey, I think it's a good episode overall. I'd give it probably... I'd probably give it about a C+. This is such a sweet episode. Well, the first half at least. And it's about a worm, too. So basically, SpongeBob and Patrick have to babysit all of Sandy's animals while she's away. And one particular animal that they really like is a worm that they end up naming Wormy. And SpongeBob and Patrick end up singing or not SpongeBob and Patrick, but a song ends up playing about their friendship, which is honestly probably one of the weakest songs in Season 2, just because it's too happy and cheerful for me, and I don't... cheerful for... It's just... it's not the right beat, in my opinion. It's just too happy for me. Which normally some happy songs are fine, but I don't know. This one, it didn't work for me. I'm sorry. Besides the song, though, I do think the rest of the episode is really, really good. So, eventually the day comes to an end, and SpongeBob and Patrick are sad that they have to leave Wormy for the night. But the next day, they have a surprise waiting for them, where Wormy ends up transitioning to a butterfly, and SpongeBob and Patrick don't really know it. So, unlike Imitation Krabs, where us humans watching it are like, SpongeBob, that is obviously a robot, don't be so stupid. And in this one, it's like, SpongeBob, that's obviously, Wormy, don't be so dumb, thinking this random butterfly came in and ate Wormy when it really was Wormy. And it doesn't bother me as much as Imitation Krabs did. Because at least, they have a bunch of funny things, like them trying to catch Wormy at first, and then Wormy ends up getting released out into the city, and now everyone is afraid of Wormy, including Mr. Krabs and Squidward for some reason. I don't know, it's just such a okay, it's not the best thing ever, but I think it's a pretty good episode overall. And it ends with Sandy coming and saving the day. It's a great episode. I give it a B. Patty hype. Man, oh man, another great episode from Season 2. So, the Krusty Krab isn't getting a lot of customers. So, SpongeBob has an idea to have the Krabby Patties be different colors. But Squidward and Mr. Krabs ends up mocking him and laughing at him. And what I liked about this particular SpongeBob is that instead of crying about it and saying, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Krabs, what was I thinking about making these patties and trying my own idea?" Instead, he stands up to them and is like, "Fine, then I'll just open my own stand and sell these," which I'm really glad that the usual spineless SpongeBob is actually standing up for himself. So then him and Patrick open up a stand and sell Krabby Patties. Oh, these colorful Krabby Patties, which at first everyone laughs at, but then they try them and it becomes really, really popular. It's so popular that even Mr. Krabs takes notice and wants to run the stand himself. And the only way to do that is to let SpongeBob be the owner of the Krusty Krab, and that's exactly what ends up happening. And the episode ends with the crowd finding out that the patties were actually turning them into the different colors that they were eating. They get mad at Mr. Krabs and chase him down. A great ending to a great episode. There's a lot of funny things in this episode, too. Like, when SpongeBob sees Patrick for the first time in this episode, he's like, hey, Patrick, are you angry, too? He's like, yeah. And SpongeBob's like, why? And he's like, I can't see my forehead. It's classic writing. Overall, it's a great episode. I'd give it an A. Now it's time for Grandma's Kisses. Okay, not gonna lie, this episode isn't really that good. It starts off with SpongeBob spending the day at his grandma's house. And before he leaves to go to the Krusty Krab, his grandma ends up giving him a kiss, which for some reason everyone at the Krusty Krab is making fun of him for. Why? Why? It's just a kiss from his family member. Who gives a crap? But he's now too worried about that, so he has Patrick over to try to help him to act more like an adult and not receive kisses from his grandma. And they end up going over to his grandma's house again, now with adult SpongeBob and Patrick. But, of course, Patrick, being Patrick, ends up ditching the plan and acts like a baby then because he likes it so much, which leaves poor SpongeBob all by himself. And now we get to see SpongeBob trying to... SpongeBob's basically just in this episode just to be tortured. That's the thing. And then when SpongeBob is about ready to leave, he ends up bawling his eyes out. And not even that. He just throws like a giant fit. Because Patrick's getting the love and not him. Good lord. This episode is a train wreck. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it definitely gets very annoying. It doesn't help seeing SpongeBob throw a fit like a little baby. And that lasts for like a good solid 2 minutes. And the rest of the episode is just everyone making fun of SpongeBob. What? Who cares if he got a kiss from his grandma? Who gives a crap? In fact, good. I'm glad you got a kiss from your grandma, SpongeBob. Don't listen to those bullies. I don't know. This episode just gets so boring for me. It's dry, and the story itself is just garbage. It's an easy F tier for me. Alright, this is way better. So, now, in this episode, Squidward finally moves away, which is awesome. Finally, get away from SpongeBob and Patrick after all these years of them bothering him. So Squidward ends up moving to a town called Squidville, where they only allow squids. And it's funny how all the houses look exactly like Squidward's. So then Squidward is so happy because, like, no SpongeBob, no Patrick, he can just relax in a town full of people like him. Unfortunately, though, after spending a lot of days in Squidville, he starts getting a little bored of Squidville and kind of missing some of the hype that he would usually get from SpongeBob and Patrick. Even to the point where he starts playing with the reef blower, which leads to a lot of hilarious scenes. And then SpongeBob and Patrick come by to apologize to Squidward, which is really nice. Instead of the usual them teleporting inside because why the heck not, and then them getting mad at Squidward and he gets tortured, now SpongeBob and Patrick actually, make it in, but it's for a good reason, too. It's not just to annoy Squidward. And they're going to apologize to Squidward, which is really nice. But at this point, Squidward is just having a good old time running around with this reef blower now. Playing with it, which is really funny. And then we get to see some funny moments with SpongeBob and Patrick saying, "Are you Squidward? Are you Squidward?" And then Squidward ends up getting out of the town, which goes to show, Squidward may want to move away, but eventually he is going to get tired of the non-chaos and wants some of that back in his life again. So it's just overall such a great episode. It's kind of like what would happen in Opposite Day from Season 1 if Squidward did actually move away. It's a great episode overall. It's an easy A tier for me. I love this one. Oh, good. We finally got to a Sandy episode. So Sandy is going to hibernate in a week. So she tries to spend as much time with SpongeBob as possible before she ends up, hibernating. The only thing is that she ends up playing a lot of dangerous games, like back to back to back, without any breaks. So that tears SpongeBob apart, as he says. And SpongeBob quickly gets tired of these games, so he runs away from Sandy and hides under Patrick's house, where Sandy ends up searching the whole town for SpongeBob. I think it's really cool seeing how Sandy loves SpongeBob enough to, get the whole town to look for SpongeBob, which is really cool. Eventually, everyone gets tired of Sandy, so they also hide under Patrick's house, and they end up sending SpongeBob up so Sandy knows where SpongeBob is. But by the time SpongeBob can apologize to Sandy, she's already fast asleep even she's tired of the games she's playing. You see, this episode is pretty good. Yeah, it does get a little extreme, but let's be real. We got Squirrel Jelly from Season 11, and that was way, way worse. At least in this episode, Sandy doesn't seem too out of character, and she just feels like, and it just seems like she just wants to play sports, but all back to back because, she only has a week to do that. And she's still caring for SpongeBob in this episode, and not just completely changing her character. This is overall a pretty decent episode. I'd probably give it a C+. Next up is Life of Crime. Another pretty good episode from Season 2. So SpongeBob and Patrick are hanging out, and they want a balloon. So instead of buying one because they don't have any money, they end up stealing one, or as I like to say, borrowing it. But the balloon accidentally pops, so then they get upset and run away from town. And they end up making a campfire underwater with the iconic chocolate bar scene. Look what I have! Rectangles! There's a lot of funny one-liners in this episode. Then they both start fighting because of Patrick. Oh boy. And then they end up running to the police department and tattletaling each other like two little children until eventually they both just blurt out, "We stole a balloon." And they end up going to jail for a total of like 2 seconds because it was National Free Balloon Day. This one is overall a pretty good episode. What could have been... This is definitely one of those episodes that could have been a very slow-paced, boring mess of an episode, but it turned out to be a really great episode. I'd give it a B. Now we have our first Christmas episode in SpongeBob, and this episode is really good as well. So, SpongeBob learns about Santa from Sandy. So he gets everyone in Bikini Bottom to write Santa their wish list, or their list for Christmas. And Squidward is the only one who doesn't participate because he finds it stupid. And SpongeBob ends up putting up a bunch of decorations everywhere and stuff. And of course they sing the iconic song, which is a really good song in Season 2. Also like how everyone in this episode is in character for the most part. They're not out of character. They're all just in character having a good time. But then the morning comes and Santa still hasn't arrived. So then they think SpongeBob is lying, and they end up not believing, and that makes poor SpongeBob upset. And it's so heartbreaking even for Squidward can't even take it. Although at first he does make fun of SpongeBob, but then when SpongeBob gives him a gift, he ends up realizing how big of a jerk he was. So he ends up dressing up as Santa to give everyone literally everything in his house, which I think is really hilarious. And it turns out Santa was just late, so he thanked Squidward for taking over. I don't know. This is just such a great episode from Season 2. Easily one of my favorites. It's an S tier. Hey, look at that. Another Sandy episode. So this time around, this is during hibernation. So it's kind of funny how the episodes line up like that. We start with pre-hibernation week. This is before Sandy hibernates. And then it's Christmas time. And then it's during Sandy's hibernation. Or I should say towards the end of it. So SpongeBob and Patrick end up breaking into her house while she's hibernating. And they find Sandy looking a little bigger than usual due to her, stocking up for winter. So SpongeBob and Patrick make the stupid decision to play in Sandy's house while she's sleeping because there's snow everywhere. So with all the loud noise, that ends up waking Sandy up, and she ends up literally beating the crap out of them. So SpongeBob and Patrick try to get out of there, but the door is frozen shut. So they end up stealing Sandy's fur to keep warm for wintertime. But then, just like that, it turns into springtime. And Sandy then realizes that SpongeBob and Patrick took her fur. So she ends up using SpongeBob and Patrick as clothes until her fur comes back. It's just such a great episode overall. There's a lot of funny moments in this episode, like SpongeBob and Patrick constantly yelling at each other the "I'm dirty Dan, I'm dirty Dan," and then Patrick trying to open the door with his "open sesame" thing. It's a great episode, another classic from season 1. I'd give it probably between an A or like a B plus. It's really close. You know what? I'd give it an A minus. It's great. A. Now we're getting into that section of season 2 where the episodes just, I don't know what it was with middle of season 2, but a lot of the episodes were just poorly written or just stupid. So we start off with Dumped. Yeah, this episode is dumb. So SpongeBob and Gary are playing hide and seek, and Patrick comes over, and Gary seems really interested in Patrick. So Gary and Patrick end up playing for the whole day, which ends up leading to a sleepover, which ends up leading to the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and this is where the point where SpongeBob is like, okay, Gary, enough is enough, come back to my house. But Gary doesn't listen, and neither does Patrick. And in fact, Patrick just makes the whole situation worse with him thinking now that he owns Gary, which is completely out of character for Patrick, but definitely in character for mid-season Patrick. Anywho, so Gary ends up choosing Patrick between whoever Gary goes near you, then that's who he goes for. And he ends up going towards Patrick, which of course leaves SpongeBob devastated. So he ends up buying a worm that runs away and a snail named Larry, which doesn't like him at all, and a lot of other things here and there. Or not a lot of other things, but after that he just kind of got upset. Then Patrick comes over and borrows SpongeBob's washer for some reason, and he ends up taking Gary with him, and SpongeBob is pleading for Gary to come back, but of course Gary won't. But then eventually it is revealed that Gary was just following Patrick for a cookie in his pants. Really? We had this whole mess of an episode just because Gary wanted a cookie from Patrick's shorts? Oh god, this episode is horrible. I know a lot of people poo-poo on the newer seasons too, but it's like, really? There's a lot of better episodes from even Season 6 compared to this episode. Yes, Season 6 has better episodes than this horrible episode. This is horrible. I hate this episode. Patrick is annoying. Gary is annoying. Everyone else, the only person I'm rooting for in this episode is SpongeBob. And he doesn't get, it's not good until the last, 15 seconds of the episode. It's a horrible episode overall. Easy F tier for me. I hated this one, and I still do. And now we have our first Mrs. Puff episode. Not gonna lie, a lot of the earlier episodes of Mrs. Puff are pretty boring, because it's mainly just Mrs. Puff getting tortured and thrown in jail. Woohoo, whoop-de-doo. That's exactly what I wanted to come to watch SpongeBob for. So in this episode, Mrs. Puff has had enough of SpongeBob, so she ends up just passing SpongeBob. And she figures, this ain't gonna go anywhere, but that ends up to SpongeBob and his parents throwing a party and getting SpongeBob his own boat, which he ends up trying to, I shouldn't say drive, but he loves it a lot. Mrs. Puff obviously doesn't like it and tries to steal his boat, but when she does end up stealing his boat, SpongeBob is sleeping on the boat. He loves it that much. And so we end up seeing a lot of Mrs. Puff versus SpongeBob scenes. And then, I really don't remember how the episode ends. I believe it's another one of those Mrs. Puff goes to jail episodes. I don't know. This is another one of those meh episodes. It's not the worst thing from Season 2, or even the worst Mrs. Puff episode ever. But, it's just boring. I'll give it a D. I'm Your Biggest Fanatic is the next episode. And, it's not a horrible episode, but the best episode in Season 2? Nah, I don't think so. So, SpongeBob is a big fan of Kevin the Sea Cucumber. The jelly, who is a great jellyfisher, I guess. So, SpongeBob ends up going jellyfishing with Kevin, and Kevin ends up bullying SpongeBob. Okay, it's not the usual funny pranks like we get with Squidward. No, Kevin's just there to bully SpongeBob. But what I really do like is that usually when he bullies SpongeBob, he usually gets what's coming for him right away. Like, he wants SpongeBob to capture a bunch of jellyfish, so that ends up happening right away. And they even go and sting Kevin afterwards. Then they rip whatever the heck that is off of Kevin's head and put it on SpongeBob. I don't know, the story is a really odd one to tell. It's just easier to watch it for yourself. I don't really know. This episode's fine, I guess. I'd probably give it a C. Also, I forgot to mention, I love the beginning where Patrick touches everything. He's like, touch! And then the security guard comes around and is like, don't touch. And now we have a Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode. Alright, this one is really good. So, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are going on vacation, so they ask SpongeBob and Patrick to watch their lab. Very smart choice. So SpongeBob and Patrick start searching around in the lab, and they end up finding Man Ray in their lab, and they accidentally unfreeze Man Ray. But Man Ray ends up tricking SpongeBob and Patrick into thinking that he wants to change and be nice. So they end up giving Mermaid Man Man Ray these lessons to become good, with a lot of really funny moments. Man Ray's a really hilarious character. Anywho, he gets some really funny scenes like the Patrick's wallet scene, and I like how Man Ray has a tickle belt. I don't know, there's just a lot of funny things in this episode, and then eventually Man Ray reveals that he was just tricking them and ends up running away to try to rob a bank, but that goes wrong because now he feels that tickle from that belt, so he just starts laughing every time he wants to take over the bank. He just ends up giving up then at the end of the episode, which I think is really great. Which I think is funny, it's a great episode overall. Definitely another really great one. I'd give it an A. And now, another Sandy episode, being Squirrel Jokes. So, in this episode, SpongeBob has to make jokes in front of a crowd. Oh, so this is kind of like a sequel to Culture Shock from Season 1. Well, not really. Because any joke SpongeBob makes is now all of a sudden not funny. Oh yeah, that's because he's not against Squidward this time. Except if SpongeBob makes jokes about Sandy, aka Squirrel Jokes. Then everyone starts roaring in laughter, except for Sandy, of course. Sandy doesn't really like it and tells SpongeBob to stop. And SpongeBob doesn't stop and continues the squirrel jokes. So Sandy teaches SpongeBob a lesson, and dang does she really get mad in this episode. Or I should say, she doesn't. There's never really a time that she seems mad, but you can tell she's definitely mad in this episode. It's like, oh god, SpongeBob, what did you do? So he ends up going over to Sandy's house, and she pretends to be everything that he said in those jokes. Stupid, and even almost to the point of killing SpongeBob. Wow. Sandy is annoying, not gonna lie. In the episodes that they try to make her be so off of her character, it's not even funny, then she ends up being one of my least favorite characters in the show, because it's like, really? You're gonna try to torture some of the funniest SpongeBob characters ever? Or you're gonna torture these characters for stupid reasons? Just sit down and have a talk with SpongeBob. Yes, both times they were rushing, but both times Sandy was trying to rush, so she didn't really have a chance to talk to SpongeBob. But her way of doing it is, alright, fine, we'll make you almost die, and then you'll probably change your mind. And SpongeBob even shows up with a Band-Aid on him. Good Lord. Sandy is very annoying in this episode, not gonna lie. But yeah, SpongeBob didn't listen to Sandy, but at the same time, it's like, geez Louise. The episode ends then with SpongeBob making fun of everyone instead, to make it even. There is some decent parts about this episode, but what makes this episode bad is Sandy. So I'd give it a D. And here we have another bad Sandy episode. So it starts with SpongeBob and Sandy just sitting there watching the clouds, but then the two become, what's the word? They want competitive. They both become competitive with each other, and they try to race up a mountain. But Sandy cheats and goes ahead of SpongeBob, which of course makes SpongeBob upset. So by the time SpongeBob gets up there, Sandy is already there. So they rematch to the Krusty Krab, and SpongeBob this time ends up taking ahead of Sandy, which that makes Sandy upset, but SpongeBob ends up beating her there first. But then Sandy gets mad that SpongeBob didn't start fairly. Sandy, you literally did the same exact... Oh, it was a joke. Oh, I'm sorry, Sandy. I didn't know it was a joke. Otherwise, it would... Sandy in this episode is annoying as heck. She really if she has bad episodes, they are bad. Like, she gets so out of character, it's not even funny, and it just makes her such an unlikable jerk. Now, yes, this is an episode where underwater breathers and air breathers are being competitive with each other, but still, it just feels like Sandy started the whole thing, because if it wasn't for... I feel like if it wasn't for her cheating, going up the mountain, none of that would have ever happened. But she had to cheat, win, and of course SpongeBob was upset because of it. Yeah, sure, you were totally joking when you ripped those rocks right off the mountain to let them topple on SpongeBob. So Sandy ends up taking the helmet off herself to breathe underwater, but of course that doesn't work, so she has to put a pickle jar on her head. So she ends up making SpongeBob, Squidward, Patrick, and Mr. Krabs go out of the water to survive on land for a little bit. I mean, it's not like they forced Sandy to take her helmet off. She literally did that herself. Okay, then. And then she's forcing them up on the land. They do end up surviving, but they are getting eaten by some hungry pelicans, which Sandy fights off. The episode ends with all them friends again. Sandy, this is another one of those bad Sandy episodes. She is just so out of character in this episode, it's not even funny. She wants to cheat to win? What, you afraid SpongeBob's gonna beat you and you can't take it? Now she's just being a sore loser. Oh, episodes like this really make me mad at Sandy. Although it isn't a terrible episode, I'd give it a D, but... Oh, Sandy! Jeez Louise, she gets on my nerves. Okay, this is better. We finally have a break from all those bad episodes. So in this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick go to see a clam. SpongeBob accidentally throws a peanut at the clam and makes her upset. So now she's making a loud noise that you can hear far away, but no one knows that it was SpongeBob. Until the very end of the episode where he ends up revealing himself. It's just a lot of rinse and repeat stuff in this episode where he tries to tell one friend, but then he realizes how mad they'd get if they found out who it was. It's a lot of rinse and repeat stuff. My favorite part of the episode is probably Patrick, where he's trying to play detective and he ends up getting captured. Then they throw peanuts at Patrick, and then it's really Mr. Krabs. It's a lot of detective mystery in this episode. It's not the worst thing ever. I do think it's a decent episode, but the best? I'd give it probably a B. Next we have our Flying Dutchman episode, and man, what another great episode. So it's Squidward, Patrick, and SpongeBob climb a anchor that ends up being to the ship of the Flying Dutchman. So the Flying Dutchman throws Squidward down a portal and makes SpongeBob and Patrick scare people, which I think is a funny prank. And of course, because it's SpongeBob and Patrick, they don't do a good job. Like, they break the Flying Dutchman's ship, and they're not scary at all. And there's a lot of other funny scenes in this episode, and I also like the makeup department scene too, where SpongeBob and Patrick have to get from the jail cell to get out. They have to go through the makeup department. It's such a hilarious episode, or such a hilarious scene. Then the Flying Dutchman, I guess, is nice and gives him 3 wishes. Squidward ends up teleporting back, and yeah, that's basically the episode. I think it's a really great one overall. I'd give it another A. Oh god, no, not this garbage. If you've seen my channel, you know I despise Gary Takes a Bath. Why? Because of Gary. Do I really need to explain why this episode is so bad? Gary doesn't listen to his owner, and SpongeBob is too stupid to do anything to punish Gary. Gary is randomly really strong and smart, and leaves SpongeBob into getting really mad at him, and making SpongeBob go up a tree, get stuck, get muddy, and SpongeBob now having to take a bath. Oh my, this episode is horrible. Horrible, horrible. And it goes after one gimmick. SpongeBob trying to give Gary a bath. But Gary is so freaking obnoxious in this episode. It's not even funny. Don't get me wrong. I think Gary is a fine enough character. But episodes like this just make me want to tear him to shreds. Oh, this episode is horrible. There was only one joke I like from this episode. And that's where SpongeBob says, I'll give this $1 to the first person who takes a bath in this house, and Mr. Krabs comes by in the bathtub. Other than that, the rest of the episode is garbage, and it's easily my least favorite episode from Season 2. It gets an F minus minus minus. I hate Gary in this episode with a passion, and I just really want the episode to end with Gary getting that stupid bath, because that really got me upset. At least with Pet Sitter Pat, Patrick can find a way to get Gary a bath. Yeah, it might not be the best episode ever, but at least Patrick can find a way to give Gary a bath. SpongeBob, you're going to need to learn from Patrick. Can't believe I said that, but this episode, it's horrible. Next episode is Welcome to the Chum Bucket. This episode is just such a, I don't know how to describe it, but the first half of the episode is just so, I wouldn't say sweet, but it's such a masterpiece. I love the way they did the first half of this episode, where Mr. Krabs and Plankton play cards, and usually Mr. Krabs beats Plankton, but for this time Mr. Krabs loses and has to trade over SpongeBob. So at first SpongeBob thinks he's joking, of course, but he's not. Plankton takes him over, and now he can't work for Mr. Krabs anymore, which both SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs are upset about. Which is really interesting. I really love seeing Mr. Krabs in this state where he's where even Mr. Krabs has some emotion instead of just, oh well, we'll just hire someone else. He feels like SpongeBob is irreplaceable. Then they sing a song which I think is a really great song, honestly. And I'm usually not the type for the sad, depressing songs, but they did such a great job with that song, and I think it's just such a great song. The second half of the episode is just fine, where Plankton ends up making SpongeBob happy, but also spoils him a lot and makes SpongeBob very bratty. And then he ends up putting SpongeBob's brain in a robot. SpongeBob, you could have just ran away. You don't have to stand there and watch as Plankton slowly comes over to you and takes your brain out. That part, I don't know why, but that's just really like SpongeBob. You can run away. You don't have to just stand there as Plankton slowly comes. Yeah, I don't know. But then at least the episode ends with SpongeBob being able to go back to work at the Krusty Krab. The second half of the episode is kind of a letdown because I think the first half is just constructed so well. So overall, I'd give this episode probably a B. Although the first half I'd give an A, and the second half I'd probably give a C, probably, or even a D. But overall, I'd probably give it a B. It's a great episode. Alright, this is more like it. Now we're back in that zone where the episodes start getting better again. So, with Frankendoodle, SpongeBob ends up finding a pencil, a magic pencil, which anything he draws comes to life, which I think is really funny. And SpongeBob ends up drawing SpongeBob, but ends up calling it Doodlebob. And this Doodlebob is evil and will do anything to destroy SpongeBob and Patrick. So a lot of funny things happen. They erase Doodlebob except for one hand, so then Doodlebob comes and redraws himself, and then him and SpongeBob have a a pencil war at the end. It's just such a great. It's one of those ones. You can't really describe it. You just gotta watch it, and it's just such a funny episode with a lot of funny quotes in it. Anything with Patrick in it, basically, in this episode is hilarious. And the ending is really good, too. I just think it's overall just such a great episode. I'd probably give this one an A+. Next, we have the secret box. So Patrick has a secret box, and you won't show anyone what's in it, not even his best friend, SpongeBob. So SpongeBob constantly gets more and more eager to see what's inside, and bribes Patrick into opening it up. But for some reason, Patrick is now all of a sudden smart and won't show SpongeBob what's in his box. So SpongeBob ends up sneaking in overnight to try to take the box, and that takes a total of 5 minutes of the episode. Patrick won't wake up for anything except for SpongeBob talking super quietly. Okay then, I guess it's in character for Patrick, but still. But at least towards the end, Patrick ends up showing SpongeBob what's in this stupid box, but it ends up being a string, or at least that's what SpongeBob thinks, until Patrick opens it up to reveal the embarrassing picture from the Christmas party. Is it the embarrassing picture that Squidward took from Christmas Who? The one with SpongeBob standing there with the Christmas tree with the tear rolling down his cheek. I don't know. This episode is just kind of dumb, not gonna lie. It just hums and haws around with nothing really going on except SpongeBob wanting to know what's inside this stupid box. And it's not really that interesting of an episode either. Plus, there's way better box episodes to begin with. Like, I don't know, Idiot Box from Season 3? I don't know. Patrick's annoying in this episode, and the episode goes really slow-paced, too, at times. I'd give this one probably a D. Well, now we reached everyone's favorite episode from all of SpongeBob. And honestly, I do think it's a really great episode, but I don't think it's my favorite of all time. But a good one, absolutely. So, Squidward has to put a band together for his rival Squilliam, and just to prove him wrong. But that goes horribly wrong because everyone is pretty bad at instruments. There's a lot of really funny one-liners in here, like Patrick's "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" And a few other moments here and there. Everyone ends up fighting at one point, and Squidward just ends up breaking down, and it's like, alright, fine, like, I just give up. But SpongeBob ends up bringing the band together to sing a very overrated song, in my opinion. But hey, it makes Squidward happy, and everyone is on Squidward's side in this episode. I also like how instead of them laughing at Squidward for crying and getting upset, they actually try to stop what they're doing and try to situate themselves. If this was Season 6, the complete opposite would have happened. But we got overall a really great episode. Also like Squilliam in this episode. The introduction of Squilliam. It's overall a really good episode. My favorite? No. But a good one? Yes. But I think I would give it an S tier. It is a good episode. Oh man, this is another hilarious episode. So, Mr. Krabs ends up opening the Krusty Krab for 24 hours, and while he goes home, Squidward and SpongeBob have to watch the Krusty Krab. While SpongeBob is happy at first, he ends up getting scared with Squidward's story about the hash-slinging slasher, which leads to a lot of funny moments which could easily have been filler, like the secret box, but it ends up turning into a really hilarious episode. I also love all the sound effects that Squidward does in this episode to make the story seem so real. Speaking of real, once the story is done, then some things from that story end up becoming true, like the lights and the phone ringing and the quote-unquote hash-slinging slasher arriving at the Krusty Krab, which ends up just being the customer who wants an application. Man, this episode is so goofy and filled with a lot of funny things. One of my favorite lines is Patrick waking up at 3 a.m. Just to eat a Krabby Patty. It's a great episode. No words need to explain this one. It's a great one overall. Easily one of my favorites from Season 2. Easy S tier. Oh man, another really great episode from Season 2. So, Mr. Krabs sometimes can get really annoying in SpongeBob. But then you have episodes like this where he actually turns out to be a really great character. So Mr. Krabs sees Mrs. Puff and ends up falling in love with her. So he ends up blabbling his way to a date with her with the help of SpongeBob. And I really like the way that, like, he wants SpongeBob to help him, and he also wants, like, he loves Mrs. Puff, and he wants to spend money on her, but at the same time he likes money too, so it's kind of hard. But they do end up going on a date to a fancy dinner where Mr. Krabs spends a lot of his money on her, and afterwards kind of regrets it. So he brings SpongeBob along to kind of make Mr. Krabs watch, or make SpongeBob watch Mr. Krabs and make sure he doesn't spend too much money on too many gifts. So obviously that goes horribly wrong, and Mr. Krabs ends up buying a whole bunch of things from Mrs. Puff, with another really funny montage with SpongeBob constantly running to the store, coming back, Mr. Krabs yelling at him for buying that, but then wants to get her something else. It's just such a hilarious scene, and then SpongeBob just gets upset then eventually because Mr. Krabs keeps telling him to do all that stuff, and is like, it's not about this or this, it's like this, or something like that. It's really funny. But at least towards the end of the episode, Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff still go on that date, even though Mrs. Puff is there while Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob are going through all that. Oh my, this episode is hilarious. It's full with a lot of funny moments, and and I think, in my opinion, it's probably my favorite episode from season 2. I'd give it an S tier. Next episode, Procrastination. So SpongeBob has to basically do homework for the whole episode. That's basically how the episode is. Alright, let's move on. Alright, just kidding. Let's talk about it for a little bit. So while SpongeBob is doing this homework, he keeps having all these distractions. And he just keeps he doesn't, like, he knows he has to do it, but he keeps doing other things to be like, oh, whoops, I accidentally did this, so now I can't do my homework. But then he goes back to, oh shoot, I have to do this because it's due. Which ends up leading to SpongeBob falling asleep and having a nightmare about his whole house catching on fire. But he eventually ends up doing the homework and turns it into Mrs. Puff's classroom just to find out that, oops, it's canceled now. You see, I think this episode would be great if it didn't relate to me so much. I was definitely a SpongeBob when it came to school. I hated homework. It's like, when I get home from school, the last thing I want to do is to do more school. So usually I'd finish homework at school when I had time, because I hated doing homework at school. But I don't know, parts of SpongeBob just really remind me of me, because I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely would procrastinate a lot about doing homework. So this episode definitely is too relatable to me, which makes it... And honestly, besides SpongeBob trying to not do his homework, there's not really much else to the episode, so it does get kind of sloggy at times. So honestly, it's not my favorite episode. I'd give it a D. Oh god, you knew this one was coming up somewhere. Oh boy, you guys thought Valentine's Day was bad from season 1, or even dumped from this season? Well, so far now, this is the worst Patrick episode. So far. There's still way, way worser episodes with Patrick in it in the later episodes. But this episode, oh, I don't know what they were thinking. So Patrick's family's coming over, and they think Patrick is really dumb, because he is. So SpongeBob tries to help his friend out and pretend he's the dummy, even dumber than Patrick. The only problem is now they start thinking that SpongeBob actually is dumb, and even Patrick, which leads SpongeBob into getting upset because no one will listen to him. So he does the right thing and runs away from Patrick, his supposed best friend. Jeez Louise. Patrick is annoying as heck in this episode. I don't know, I don't have words for this train wreck. Why would they make this episode? It's just such a stupid piece of crap. Patrick is annoying as heck. His pretend family, whatever you want to call it, the family he thinks is his parents, but they aren't. But yeah, it's a train wreck of an episode. We all know it's bad. Yep, F tier. Okay, this is much better. So in this episode, SpongeBob learns a brand new word. Unfortunately, this word isn't necessarily a good word, and he ends up blurting it throughout the Krusty Krab along with Patrick. So eventually, Mr. Krabs ends up catching him and tells him not to say that word. So him and Patrick try not to, but when playing Eels and Escalators, that word ends up slipping out of SpongeBob's mouth. So Patrick goes to tattletale on SpongeBob. What is it with Patrick and SpongeBob always having to tattletale on each other? First, Life of Crime, and now this one. Anywho, then Patrick ends up saying the cuss word, so SpongeBob is like, alright, fine, I'll tattletale on you then. So so then they both tattletale on each other, and Mr. Krabs makes them paint the Krusty Krab, but Mr. Krabs accidentally stubs his foot, and then he starts using a bunch of cuss words, which I think is kind of hilarious, and I could see Mr. Krabs cussing more out of any of the other SpongeBob characters. So then they end up going to tell Mr. Krabs' mom on him, which I think is hilarious. So Mr. Krabs' mom ends up making all three of them paint her house, which is really hilarious. It's just a great episode overall, and I love how they don't make it seem like, oh, it's A-okay to use these swear words. Like, it's just, the writing is so perfect, like, they don't know what the word is, so they're just gonna say it, and Mr. Krabs is nicely telling them, don't say this word, like it's a bad word. It's just a great episode overall. I'd give this one another A tier. Another classic Squidward and SpongeBob episode from season 2. Although not quite as bad as not quite as good as Dying for Pie, but I do think it's still a great episode. So Squidward is an art teacher, and guess who his only student is? SpongeBob, of course. But unlike other Squidward being teacher episodes, Professor Squidward from season 6, SpongeBob actually acts like an actual student in this episode, not like a mindless turd. So SpongeBob ends up creating a lot of good art that Squidward clearly likes but won't tell SpongeBob. So when an art judge comes and likes SpongeBob's creation, and it wants to take it, it accidentally breaks, so Squidward has to get SpongeBob back. But because SpongeBob has been told from Squidward that he has no talent, now he's actually trying to do no talent with all of his work. Overall, it's just a classic episode. Nothing else I have to say. Another A tier. Time for some Jellyfish Hunter. So, this is an interesting-ish episode, I guess. Okay, maybe it's not that interesting, but basically SpongeBob loves jellyfishing. So, he ends up putting this jellyfish jelly on a Krabby Patty, and everyone really likes this. So SpongeBob ends up going and capturing more jellyfish for Mr. Krabs, so then they can make more of this jellyfish jelly on the Krabby Patty. Unfortunately, though, SpongeBob ends up capturing basically all the jellyfish, but one single jellyfish, this blue one that SpongeBob calls No Name, ends up taking SpongeBob away, literally in a net, to show him what Mr. Krabs has been doing with the other jellyfish. So SpongeBob ends up releasing all the jellyfish, and they all attack Mr. Krabs, and they're all free, and that's the end of the episode. It's not a horrible episode, but I just feel like there's nothing much happens in this episode, especially compared to other great episodes we got in this same season. It's fine. I'll give it a C, I guess. And now with our last three good episodes, or last three season 2 episodes, we start off with the Fry Cook games. So SpongeBob is versing Patrick in these Fry Cook games, because you have to be a Fry Cook. And of course they're referencing the Krusty Krab and the Chum Bucket. So we get to see a lot of cool SpongeBob versus Patrick moments, and they're actually interesting and well inventive, unlike the Secret Box and Dumped, where they're both just fighting because why the heck not? Now it actually feels like a purpose, and they're actually doing it in creative ways. And the ending of the episode is actually really sweet, where they both find out that they're wearing each other's underpants, or the colors of, like, Patrick's wearing yellow, whose color SpongeBob, and SpongeBob is wearing pink, Patrick's color. So they both end up tying it off and walk off into the sunset best friends again. This is how you do a SpongeBob versus Patrick episode. Not whatever that stupid Dumped episode is. But this is a great episode overall, and it's another great one from Season 1. I'd give it an A. Okay, now we've been back to these slow-paced episodes. For the most part, Season 2 had a lot of really, really good episodes. Then you get Squid on strike. So basically, Mr. Krabs is charging Squidward and SpongeBob for silly things that they do. So Squidward gets mad and wants him and SpongeBob to go on strike. So they both do that, and the whole episode is basically just them trying to convince everyone to not eat the Krusty Krab, and it goes miserably wrong, and they end up getting more people with the Krusty Krab. So SpongeBob ends up taking apart the Krusty Krab, although Squidward is rehired. So their punishment is they both have to work at the Krusty Krab for eternity. This episode just, yet again, is a really slow, boring episode with not much happening. There's a few funny moments here and there, but it's just such a boring episode overall. And there is, surprise, surprise, some Squidward torture parts in this episode. Not as bad as other episodes, but I don't know. It's just such a slog compared to other episodes. Nothing really goes on with the story. It's just Squidward and SpongeBob trying to get people not to eat at the Krusty Krab, and of course that goes wrong. I'd give this like a D. And now our last episode from Season 2, Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm. Okay, at least this time around the story is actually something, and it's actually really good, honestly. A big worm comes to town, and everyone's afraid. So Patrick has the great idea to take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else. But Sandy and SpongeBob end up going to try to capture the worm, although everyone ends up going on Patrick's plan to move Bikini Bottom. We do get to see some interesting SpongeBob and Sandy moments, although it is definitely just a lot of fighting because SpongeBob doesn't want Sandy to go capture this worm, but Sandy's too stubborn to listen to SpongeBob, so she ends up attacking the worm's tongue, while SpongeBob constantly tells Sandy not to, and Sandy just won't listen. So when Sandy finally realizes that that was the tongue, then they end up running away. And eventually they lead the worm off to where Bikini Bottom is now placed. I think I've grown to like this episode maybe a little more than when I first thought of it. Only a little, though. I still don't think it's a great episode, and such a meh way to end off Season 2. It's mainly just SpongeBob and Sandy fighting for a lot of it. It is definitely better than Squid on Strike, but SpongeBob and Sandy just fight the whole time. Or should I say, Sandy fights with SpongeBob the whole time because she's too stubborn to listen to him. So, that's basically how the episode goes. It's not a horrible one, and I'd end it off probably with a C. And boy, with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. This one was definitely a longer one, but I hope you enjoyed. And remember, I'm going to be going to the beach this week. I'm going to be doing a live stream on my other channel. So, if you guys want to, you can check it out. If not, that's cool. I'm going to send the my second channel down in the description of this video. Hope you all have a good day.